City Jazz Sessions is about great music, arts, and entertainment. We are located in St. Louis, Missouri, and available to performance art lovers worldwide. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and Twitter. You can email us at cityjazzsessions@gmail.com. You're on.
All right, how's it going, everybody? Good to talk to you, Bill. Leon, are you on with me?
I am here.
All right. Well, today we have a very special guest. This actually marks, I'm reading the 64th year of his professional career, coming from a fourth generation of a family who has played music of all styles, moved to New York City, was a part-time student at Juilliard, then left to go to the Army, was drafted and in the Army band in Fairbanks, Alaska. Also, our guest for today has played with the George Benson Quartet, Isaac Hayes, Ruth Brown, Bobby Short, Roland Hanna. I mean, the list goes on and on. Today, I am so excited to introduce everybody to Bill Easley. Say hi, Bill. Thank you for coming.
Hello, Candace. I haven't seen you since you were a little girl. How you've blossomed into a grown-up.
Good to see you. And we have Leon over here as well. So I guess we should, what do you want to talk about today, Bill? We have a lot of extensive history that we could go into. Let's start with what you've been up to.
As of late, I haven't been up to a whole lot. I've been working for many, as you said, 60 some years. So I am now at 77 years old, and most of the people that I've worked with are no longer on the planet. I'm living in a city that I've lived in for a while, and really haven't really become a part of the community, which is okay because sometimes past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. So when I can always go back to a former moment or project a future moment.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I don't do a whole lot. I went to Detroit last week. I've go in January. I did about 4 days at the Birdland in New York. I've been to the.
I don't do a whole lot. I don't do a whole lot. I spent 4 days at Birdland.
No, I'm serious, but not like I used to be busy every day, all day for many years. I was in New York. I moved in Memphis and in New York. I was always my goal as a child. I never had any aspirations for stardom or anything but my goal, because as you said, I'm a fourth generation, so my goal has always been to this day to be a working musician. You understand? In other words, to be working, and that's what I've managed to do for many years. So
let's segue with that, talking about you being a fourth generation musician in your family. Tell us a little bit about how do you create 4 generations of musical excellence? Tell me about your parents and how that whole thing evolved. Okay. You guys have a really rich history.
Okay, let's go with my mother and father. My mother and father had a band together from 1928. My father was on the road with a 5-piece band, and they kept, back in those days, you travel all over, so they ended up had for a gig in my hometown called Olean, New York. And the saxophone player in the band at that time was a man named Turntine, who happened to be Stanley Turntine's father. So Mr. Turntine had a family emergency to where he had to go back to Pittsburgh. So they had hired a local saxophone player, which was my uncle. His name was Dar Barnes. And so that's where my mother and father, they met in 1928, and my mother was a piano player. And so they had a band together from the late 20s, and I joined their band in 1959. So, and then her mother went to a music conservatory in Pennsylvania, and her father was like a bandmaster and played all of the instruments, and his son. So I'm a fourth generation musician, third generation saxophonist.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's sort of the family history. But I started working in my parents' band when I was 13 years old. We played country clubs and dances and clubs and all kind of, mostly weekend by that time. But I bought my first clarinet, and my father signed for a note for me, and the clarinet was $330, and my payments were $12.25 a month. So I had to at least get 1 gig a month to pay my bills, you see. So.
Right. So is that where your sister started performing as well? Because she is also a recorded artist.
Yeah.
Okay.
My youngest sister was a very, very. In fact, my oldest sister was actually a classical singer, an opera singer.
Okay.
And my oldest sister, she's, really, really gifted. I can still hear her voice. She's been gone a long time, but I'm talking about one of the greatest classical voices that I've ever heard. And over the years, I've worked with Jesse Norman. I've worked with a whole lot of variety of people, but my oldest sister had a voice like, again, I can still hear it, you see. So, and then my youngest sister was more contemporary, and she was in New York before I moved to New York. I don't think I would have gone to New York had my sister. She was 9 years older than me, so she was in New York. So to go from a little small town to go right to New York, was kind of a big step. But I don't think I would have done it had my sister not been there before. And I adjusted to New York just like that. Within months, I was a working musician.
And you moved there in 64?
64, September of 64. And you got to keep in mind that all the riots and things that had gone on that summer. And I moved right to Harlem from this little town upstate. I was like Gomer Piles. And I pulled up on about September 19th of 1960. And I got there late at night. And I'm staying at the Harlem Y. And when we get there, there's some cats sitting down on the stoop passing wine in a bottle. And I'm oh my goodness, what am I doing? You understand? Because I'd never been to New York before. And so the voice in my head, which I have a voice in my head that speaks to me continuously throughout life. But I was petrified. And the voice in my head, I couldn't sleep. And the voice in my head said, make the adjustment, as clear as a bell. I could testify of dozens of times where the voice in my head has said certain things, and that pretty much straight ahead but make the adjustment. I became a New Yorker within 2 or 3 days. You understand?
Right. It had to be done. It's like make it or perish.
So I have a quick question.
What was that, Leon? I was going to ask if you had questions, Leon.
Yeah, I have a quick question. So what was it like being in a family where your parents traveled a lot and played music?
Oh, they didn't travel a lot. We worked mainly. See, you got to realize back in every local town, you had what you call territory bands, to where you lived in a certain location and your gigs would be maybe 30 miles, 40 miles, 50 miles away. So you would go to the gig and then you'd come home after the gig. It wasn't that they weren't, but back in the day, my father was on the road with bands, what he called co-op bands. and they
Mhm.
and they traveled, and it's a whole nother world. And especially in terms of dollars and cents, what musicians, what the average working person made in those days.
Hmm.
What's changed our society more so than anything is the cost of the value of a dollar. I mean, I can
Mhm.
go back to being on the road with in the late '60s, to where I was making $150 a week, and that's before hotel bills and taxes. But that you could live comfortably. You understand? Because a day job, when I first went to New York, I had a job in a bank, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, and my salary was $62 a week. But my first gig on the road was $125 a week. You understand? So a musician's salary compared to the average person was much, much higher.
Hmm.
And today the musicians probably making the same as they were in 1964. You see, so that's a problem.
So how did you get to Juilliard from there?
I
What
you know, I
happened?
went to in other words, when I left home, naturally you're supposed I I signed up to go to school at the extension division of Juilliard, and so
Mhm.
that was really supposedly my idea, my reason for going to New York. But I only went part time, and in the
Mhm.
meantime, I'm out in the street hanging out and hanging with the cats and playing. And within no time, I was working. Most of the places that lived, including Fairbanks, as soon as I got there, I pretty much went to work right away. Just like when I got to Memphis, Tennessee in 1971, October, I got to Memphis, Tennessee. I didn't know one soul in that town, and I had $20 in my pocket. That was a Tuesday. By Friday night, I was working 7 nights a week, you see. So
Wow.
that's been the trend in my life, divine intervention. In other words, a gig gonna find me, you understand?
That's how it should go. So from there, you were in Juilliard, you did the military band, and then how did you meet George Benson? Because that would be the
Okay.
next transition for
Again,
me, right?
I'll try to keep my condensed, because everything is about divine intervention. You understand?
Right.
And I don't mean to sound corny, but that's how life works. When I was in the army, one time I went on leave, and Miles was working in Seattle, and that's with Herbie and Wayne and Tony, etc. So by
Mhm.
this time I'm 19 years old, and I'd already been to New York, but I figured, boy, when I get out of the army, I'm going to be an old man. I'm going to be 21 years old, so I better figure out what I'm going to do when I get out of the army. So I go to see Miles with Herbie and all of that at a club called the Penthouse in Seattle. And my initial plan was I was going to go see Miles, and when they took a break, I was going to go up to Miles and I was going to say, "Hello, Miles. My name is Bill Easley, and I play saxophone." And Miles would probably say, "Oh, really? And why don't you go get your horn and play with us?" So that was the plan, you see. so when I go and I got my army uniform.
We
Understand?
all had this
So
dream.
I'm sitting there, and when they hit, it was like some people coming from another planet. I had heard anything like that in my life. You have this 1966, you see. So, and I'd heard records and things, but when you see that band live, it's an out of body experience, you see.
I can
So,
imagine.
the idea, got up from my chair and I stood up in front of the band and watched the whole first set.
Wow.
And so by the time they finished, I didn't even know my name. And the voice in my head, again, the voice in my head said, "You need to go back to your hotel and hide under the bed." I'm not, word for word. That's what the voice said. So now I'm trying to get out of the club, but I can't. I'd left my army hat in the seat where I was sitting. So I'm looking all around, and
Oh
people
wow.
are trying to change audiences, and I'm trying to but I can't find my army hat. And all of a sudden, I feel these piercing eyes, and at the end of Miles's outstretched hand is my army hat, and Miles says, "Is this what you're looking for?" And I grabbed my hat and I ran out of the club. You understand? I ran out. I couldn't tell Miles my name because I didn't know my name. And so it was a very devastating experience. And so when I got back to the Army base, I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll become a chiropractor or a lumberjack or something. This music thing may not be for me. And so it was a defining moment. And at some point, within a couple days, the voice in my head said, "You got to get with a giant. You got to get with a giant." Clear as a bell. So I got out of the Army in November. By January, I'm out on the road with George Benson. You understand? And George was a giant. I spoke to him about 2-3 days ago. And I've told him, which I've told him many times over the years, I say, you know what, that was the greatest. I've been working 60 some years. That was the most productive and, most exciting period. I'm talking about including 10 Broadway shows, Isaac Hayes, I've been around the block. But I can unequivocally say that those 2 years with George back, because we're playing clubs, and you got to realize that I'm so old. I remember when black people liked jazz. You understand? So they were playing, and it was a whole different vibe. Then, things change.
Right. Well, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you was, as far as like all of the names. I mean, we could rattle off names of you all day long, and you've played with them and you've had profound musical experiences. So I wondered who you felt that way about it. I didn't know it would be George Benson.
Well, yeah, in terms of a steady gig, you understand? Because that, as I said, and I probably shouldn't even talk about dollars and cents, because George eventually made a whole lot more money. But back in those days, his whole band was booking for $950 a week, you see, and we traveled in the van, carrying the organ. And over the years, I think I can probably safely say that I probably worked with more of the great, because the black clubs back in those days, the organ circuit, Lou Donaldson, that organ circuit was the thing, especially in the black community. And so over the years, so I caught a lot of that, and I worked with every organ player that you can think of, including Jimmy Smith, Jimmy McGriff. The only two organ players that I didn't work with or record with would be Shirley Scott and one other, Larry Young. But every other organ player, major or even some lesser known organ players over that period of time I worked. And so I've been in Harlem or all over in New York. When I got to Memphis, right away, I was with an organ group, you see. So
I was going to ask you, because when I listened to Diversitonic today. Am I pronouncing that correct? Because
Diversitonic.
I want to get it right. I don't want to
I made up the word. You understand? I invented a word, and the meaning.
I'm good at that too. So I wanted to make sure I'm not, mangling someone else's invented word, because it's happened to me.
It's quite diversity. See, we're living in strange times, but the truth of the matter, diversity is a fact of life. In other words, we got not only in terms of racially, but everybody on the planet is different. You understand? And human behavior, everybody seems to want everybody to be just like them. But no, that's not the case. And everybody is different. So diversity is a fact of life. And music is often a tonic that brings people together, you see? So I made up the word, and if you Google the word, I come up, you understand?
Unpacking. All right, then.
Jazz, you don't have to say CD, you don't have to say music, it's just a word.
All right. A rebel.
In the beginning was the note, and then came the word, so we could all disagree, you see? So
a maverick right here. So on that record, I was listening. I got some tunes I really love on there. But one thing I noticed is that you had the organ sound, you had organ and piano, and that has become, and it was just so smooth and just such a a really different approach to organ and having piano at the same time. And that's been a feature of that particular album. So how did you song select for that album? And I absolutely love the piano player. Who is playing piano? Who is playing on this? Who's the person
Okay,
in?
well, the truth of the matter, all that you got to realize, all that's going on through the pandemic. In other words, the
Gotcha.
plans for that record and everything, we got a pandemic. And I'm living in a new town. And so I
Mhm.
wanted to make a record, but I wanted to be honest about it and present myself in my current environment. And so, and
Okay.
I don't even know any of the local music. I didn't really know who's who in this town, but I got, and then I, so, but in
Wow.
terms of the organ, the guy that was originally going to play organ, he backed out on me at the last minute. So I had to bring in a great friend of mine, Kyle Kohler, who is originally from Philadelphia, which is really the home, Jimmy Smith, Jimmy McGriff, all the Philadelphia
Mhm.
is the town which breeds organ players. And like I say, as Jimmy Smith, McGriff, I can, that played with Sonny. I'm having, anyway, there's so many, I don't know, many, Philadelphia is known
Mhm.
as organ players. So this
Right.
guy's the tail end, Joey DiFrancesco. Kyle
Mhm.
Kohler is from the Philadelphia School of Organ, and we've been friends for years and years and years. So I flew him in from New York, and I'm glad I did because you had to have. When I look back at
Awesome.
that, Kyle saved me. You understand? In terms of bringing an element that I wouldn't have had, had I not brought him in. Plus,
Mhm.
I was able to create some work for some people during the pandemic, so,
Right.
and it kept me busy, and it's easy at this point in my life. Uh, Most of my mentors or most people didn't get to be 70, 77. You see, one of my greatest mentors, Sonny Stitt. In other words, Sonny Stitt, we were great friends, but Sonny Stitt left the planet when he was 58 years old. And if you look at the age of, of Coleman Hawkins, if you look at Lester Young, if you look at most people, most of the Giants didn't. Charlie Parker was dead when he's 34. You understand? So most people don't get the longevity that I've had. So it'd be easy for me to just call. And I am going to call. I'm going to pretty much at 80. I'm telling myself now all my horns are for sale. But for the next 2 years, my plan is to get in my car and drive to anywhere that I can play.
Mhm.
So, anyway, what was the question?
There was so much to unpack in that, and honestly, it was all great information. So I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh, yeah.
We were, I didn't want to interrupt you because
You
that's
have
such
to interrupt. You have
a
to interrupt.
great back story.
You won't get
Leon,
a
do you have
word
any
in if you
questions? Because
don't
if
interrupt me.
not, I'm gonna go into a different segment. But do you have anything
No,
to
no, go right
expand on,
ahead. Go right
Leon?
ahead. I'm just
Oh,
enjoying listening to him talk.
it's wonderful, right? So basically, you did 2 years with George, then you moved to Memphis, and from there things kind of blossomed. You were working with Isaac Hayes, and how did work Ruth Brown? How did Ruth Brown come up? This is definitely, I've been listening to a lot of Ruth Brown. How did that divine intervention happen?
That's later. You can't you skip it over.
Okay,
Memphis was a whole period of almost 10 years. You understand?
okay, I'm
10
looking here.
years. So as I said, when I got to Memphis, I didn't know one soul in that town, and I
Hmm.
ran into I picked out, I had $20 and I asked around where some cats playing and so and so. So I picked out one
Okay,
club to go to, and it was in Midtown. And when I
got
walked
you.
in the club, the drummer that happened to be back in Memphis at that time was Joe Dukes, who I knew from, he was with Jack McDuff for many, many years, and he was from Memphis, but he, and every once in a while, certain cats would go back home to get away from certain things, and they'd go back home. And so Joe just happened to be back in Memphis at that time. So I sent a note to him, and so by the end of the night, finally they let me sit in, and somebody sitting there, oh man, you just come to town and blah blah blah, and I want you to work with me next weekend and blah blah blah, and we go, and by that's Tuesday, by Thursday, I'm hungry, and so the guy has a rehearsal, and luckily he gave me a $15 draw so I could get something to eat. But then we started work. Then he took me downtown after the rehearsal. He took me downtown, and Herman Green was playing downtown, and there was a guy named Lee Stone. I don't know if you remember Lee, but he had a band, Noble Parks. All of these are Memphis. Okay. Walter Reed. So I walk in the club with my horns, and so Memphis put its arms around me the first night. In other words, I walk in, this guy sees me with the horns. He says, "Hey, you want some of this, brother?" So I take out my horn and hey, man, new cat in town, man, I want you to work with me. I said, well, this cat just hired me to work Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sundays. Okay, you work with me Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You know what I mean? Now, $10 a night.
I want to see this type of aggressive work coming at me when I walk in with my horns.
It's like let me play. Again, it has to do with divine intervention. You understand? But again, you have something to do with it. You understand the way that you carry yourself or whatever. But in that, like I say, I literally, I got a room at the Y downtown was $13 for the week, so I only had $7 left. You see, and so I survived that way for at least a year and a half. You understand? Wow. And then I get the gig all of a sudden with Isaac Hayes. Isaac Hayes was hot as a firecracker. You understand? So at some point, I don't know, Anzi Horn. Again, there's so many details and so many very important names and things that I could mention. That are Anzi Horn was just he was a musical director and a great arranger. He got out of the music. He made his and he did very well. He had a club, but Anzi Horn was Isaac's conductor, and he had been with Lionel way back when Quincy was a kid. In fact, if you mention Anzi Horn to Quincy Jones, I'm sure his eyes would light up. You see. So anyway, but I got the gig with Isaac, and at that time, I never made the most money I'd made in my life at that time was $150 a week. We were making more than that a night, you understand? So when the road manager gave me my first check, I said, man, this must be a mistake, man. This must be Isaac's check, you understand? They laughed at me for years. Literally, I said, what? All this for me? You understand? So that was, and if you've been a have-not your whole life, once you become a have, you don't ever want to go back.
It's not going back at that point.
No, and I haven't. Straightforward. I haven't gone back.
So divine intervention and pursuit of paying gigs has been literally the road. It's like, how can I get paid? How can I work? And how can I play the music that I really want to play?
Everything I say is a quote of somebody else. Here's a drummer friend of mine, Randy Gillespie. If it's paying, I'm playing. You understand?
Well, that's how you become a working musician. I don't think you could be one without the pay portion.
That's how musicians used to be, you see. Right. At some point in time, you had way more musicians than you had gigs. And so and the older cats didn't call, when they called me for a gig, they called me for a gig. But at some point in time, the conversation changed. When somebody call you for a gig, the first thing they tell you, and I want is how much fun we gonna have. You understand? And then when they tell you
I'm
to
waiting on that question.
no, they say that right away. Oh, we gonna have a lot of fun. You understand? Okay, I can have fun at home. You understand?
That's where
Anyway,
I'd rather be.
yeah,
Well, I haven't been approached with that question yet, but it does come up, or that statement does come up as people are telling me about the shows. Okay, I have heard it, so I can relate.
yeah,
From
fun.
here,
I
based
call
on
it the F word.
your
Yeah.
based on your working career and the fact that you're able to give us these gems and tell us like what it was like starting out back then for you, what advice would you have for touring musicians at this point in today's market? Because you still perform out, you still have to travel. Like, what should people be working towards at this point as professional musicians?
Well, that would be very difficult for me to do because naturally my times change. We're living in a totally different world today. I wouldn't even think about advising someone to do you know what I did because I took first of all I've been to ground zero. It depends if you wanted anything that you want to do in life, it's just not in music or whatever. Everything starts here, and you have to have a plan, you have to have a vision, and you have to have determination, and you have to be really serious about what you're doing. But you can't. You have to be not only into what's in your head, but you have to be conscious of reality. If you want, you want to be a musician and nobody's calling you to work, well, that may not work very well. You see, you have to have some signs of the fact that this is your path. It's not for everybody. It's not for everybody, and some people know that. And but when the hard times come, I've not only have I been through hard times, I've had 7 horns stolen. Every time I go back to New York, they steal my horn. When I came out of the army in late 1967, my tenor and alto out of the Harlem Y. When I went back to New York, and Bill Mobley was with me when he's going to
Mhm.
check out New York. Out of the trunk of my car, my tenor, alto, flute, clarinet, piccolo, all in one shot. So
Oh
it's
my
like
goodness.
it's like okay, you want you really want to do this? In other
Mhm.
words, if you can go through the hard times, and if you are still determined after getting your butt kicked, then it may be for you. But if you can't stand no butt kicking, you better become a lumberjack or a plumber or something. But even in those fields, nothing is guaranteed. I'm
Leon,
still
any
I'm trying to figure out what am I going. I still want to work now. You understand? And I'm not the only thing missing from my life now is the element of desperation, because when you're desperate, you will find something to do. Unfortunately, I
that's
don't have any
true.
desperation anymore, so my phone is not ringing. But I'm not mad because how many people do you know had 64 good years? You understand? So.
And many more we hope, because oh my gosh, this is an exquisite project, and it just does go to show. I mean, if you made this during lockdown, then that definitely showed the desire. I actually made my last project, or the project before last, during
Yeah,
lockdown. And it's just like we all were searching for a creative outlet of some
right,
sort. we, and
right.
even the artwork on that album, that's your son's piece, correct? On the cover of
Oh yeah,
Diversity.
my son, I had my son do that because he's an artist who doesn't, he's sort of survival has taken him away from his art, and he really has no interest or no, he doesn't do much because he's got children, and he's scuffling trying to make it. And so I want to encourage him, because that's what make if you're an artist, that's what makes you feel good. You understand? Even if you don't do it professionally, if you have something that it is that's within you,
Hmm.
you have to act upon that. And again, you don't have to be a professional, but anything, because life, to be a complete person, I can unequivocally say that my livelihood has been music for all of these years. But it finally dawned upon me that my passion is really the study of human behavior and human growth and development. That's really what floats my boat. I like studying, looking at
Hmm.
people, learning about people. And as you learn about other people, and and you learn about yourself. I'm 77 and trying to figure out what I'm gonna be when I grow up. You understand? So that's
Right.
yeah.
So when you look at your career and you look at the types of things and obstacles that you overcame to just try to pursue what you wanted to do, just if it be an album, a project, or working with somebody, of all these things, and that, I guess, that desire to just really try to create, what advice could you give? Or I don't know, just what thoughts do you have on the artist need to create, and the artist need to create and overcome circumstances? Because obviously, to do this for 64 years, there has to be a burning passion of some sort. There's got to, and sometimes that may ebb and flow. Like, so how did you deal with that?
Well, as I said, desperation is the greatest motivator that you can have. But you got to pay your bills and you got to buy some food. You're gonna figure out some way to do it, or else you're gonna go walk around with your hand out. You understand? You can look for, but there's only three kinds of people: givers, takers, and users. You understand? But I'm not necessarily a guy walking around, with my hand out asking, man, can I borrow $3 or so? That's just not my nature, because I didn't come from that kind of environment. And it's just, and and I'm nothing wrong with somebody that's their way, but I, the desperation, and as I've mentioned before, the inner voice. The inner voice has spoke to me many, many, many times. You understand? And especially, and so when you are in a state of desperation, the answer's out there for you, but you can't panic, and you have to wait for the voice to tell you your next move. As I told you with Miles, the voice said, "You got to get with a giant." And when I got with the giant, it wasn't again a story. I got to New York, back to New York, and I'm
Hmm.
trying to get reestablished. And so I played a job with some people that I knew before, and I'm asking, anybody looking for a saxophone player? Anybody looking? And so this one friend of mine named Harold Osley, he called me the next day. He said, "Man, I thought of something last night, man." He said, "They're looking for somebody that plays a little flute." I started playing flute in the army, and so he gave me a number to call about somebody that was looking for a saxophone player that played some flute. So I called, and back in those days, I left a message with the guy's secretary, and the guy's name was Jimmy Boyd. He was George Benson's business partner, but I didn't know that at the time. So I left a message for this guy. I said, "My name is Bill Easley, and Harold Osley told me to call you, and so and so." And I didn't think anything more about it. I went on to my next phone call. Later on that day, I'm walking down 52nd Street, and I pass this guy on the street, and I'm carrying my horns, and being a country boy, I speak to everybody. "Hey man, hey brother, blah, blah." And he said, "Hey man, you play saxophone?" "Yeah, yeah, blah blah blah." "Yeah man, that's when we started." "Yeah, do you play flute?" I said, "Yeah, yeah." "And what's your name?" I said, "Bill Easley." He said, "What? You left a message for me today." Now see, there's 8 million people in that town. You understand? 8 million. And that's who I ran into on that day, and that ended up, at the time, they were going to be adding another saxophone because they needed somebody to play a little flute, and I had just started, but I played it. So they had a little they were at the Vanguard. They had like a little audition, and so me and about 5 or 6 other cats show up, and I just happened to play a little bit more flute than they did. So I was I was one that they were going to add to the band. But in the
Mhm.
meantime, Ronnie Cuba was in the band, and make a long story short, I became George. I became the fourth member of the band. You see, and so and that was 2 years, and we did festivals. We did with Ellington, and I got to see Miles again. I was on concert at the Hampton Jazz Festival. There's Miles. There's Monk. There's all
Mhm.
these people that I got to see. I was right on the mountaintop. And again,
Mhm.
I'm 20, 21 years. I turned 22 in January. I remember George Benson turning 25. We're on the road.
Okay.
His birthday, and me and Lonnie Smith went in and bought him a birthday card. And so
That's
all those
awesome.
things is like they happened yesterday. And when I talked to George, he remembers all the details just like I, you know. So again, the inner voice, it's about destiny. It's about being determined.
And
No,
you were obviously just in the right place to be able to receive those types of um, gigs as well. So from there, let's fast forward from Memphis and let's talk about. So after you're playing with Isaac Hayes, and by the way, were you playing like in his? Would that put you in his Watch Stacks era, or what era of
yeah,
Isaac?
we did
Were you?
watch stacks. We did, right after he won the Academy Award for Shaft. You see, because Anzi Horn, as I mentioned, because Isaac was hot, man. And when we traveled, we'd had full string orchestras. But Anzi Horn's passion was the big band, the regular 16-piece big band concept. And so Anzi, after Shaft, Anzi Horn wanted to add a full saxophone section because he figured when Isaac cooled off a little bit, we wouldn't necessarily have that full orchestra, but his passion, and he would at that time Anzi Horn was he knew he was sick. He knew that he didn't have much more time on the planet.
Mhm.
And but he that so when he hired the saxophone section, it was me, Tommy Lee Williams, Emerson Abel, and Floyd Newman, and then there was another guy named Calvin Bennett from California. But that was the five saxophones, and so Anzi Horn would write some saxophone, some little supplements to things that were already recorded. Say, for instance, from the theme of Shaft,
Mhm.
Bumpy's Blues. Anzi Horn wrote a saxophone solely for these five saxophones. And when that went in the overture, when the saxophone section played that solely that Anzi Horn had written, the whole string section would stomp their feet. In other words, it was just exquisite. And Anzi Horn would write he didn't even use a piano. He didn't use a score. He'd sit down and write out the parts. He was literally a one of the very few absolute geniuses that I've been around. Just like Phineas Newborn Jr. was a genius. You
Yeah.
understand? Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that Isaac, that was again, it's just tremendous memories and tremendous life lessons.
Definitely. And I'm thinking, so around that time period, you're there playing with Isaac and that phenomenal band. What happens to you next in life? What
Okay.
creates the next
All right.
motion?
Okay, you got to realize. See, they went through periods where Isaac would be off out making a movie or something like that. So when we were off for long periods of time, you
Mhm.
know, and then stacks folded. You understand? Because had been not only working with Isaac, but I'd been making all the record dates at Stacks. Plus Willie Mitchell. Willie Mitchell embraced me and brought me in records with Al Green and all of that. So
Mhm.
I'm busy, in the studios but when Isaac wasn't, but Stacks folded.
Wow.
Think the bottom dropped out in Memphis. You understand? So I kind of backslid back to ground and went back to the Chitlin circuit, working in the alleys with out of tune pianos. So I was ready to give it up. And The
So this
Ellen,
would have been when about 60, would this have been about 68, 60, a little later, mid 70s?
no, seven. I didn't. I was only in Memphis in the 70s. But what
Okay.
happened then? Right after Duke Ellington died,
Hmm.
the Duke Ellington right after he died, and the Duke Ellington band came to Memphis, and the guy that I mentioned before, Lee Stone, was running at working at the Peabody, in terms of beverage, and he was sort of had so Mercer. He's
Hmm.
talking. They were there for 4 or 5 days, and at that time, Lee Stone says to Mercer, he says, "Is there anything that you can do?" They needed a clarinet player because the clarinet is very important part in Ellington music. Actually, Jimmy
Definitely.
Hamilton had recommended me for his chair in the Ellington band before I came to Memphis, and
Wow.
because he had retired, you see. But the Ellington band came through Memphis, and and Stanley Dance had told Mercer, "Man, you got in order to keep the band sound, you got to find a clarinet player." You understand? So my and I get the call and I go that they're playing having a rehearsal. And so I brought my clarinet, and by then and it's really, really exciting. And so I
Hmm.
end up going out with the Ellington band right away. And so which Mercer liked me very much because what I brought to the table. Plus, I brought him Mulgrew Miller. You understand? They needed a piano player, and I brought Mulgrew Miller into the band, and Mulgrew stayed in the band for about 7 years and became Mulgrew Miller. You
I
understand?
did not know that. I did not know that you created that bridge to Mongo. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
I brought Mo because again, and Mo again, I could tangent into 400 stories just about Mo.
True.
But
You play with
yeah.
so many amazing musicians, and it's just like, I have questions about each and every one of them, obviously.
All right, wait, let me get the duct tape. One second. I got some duct tape in my
I have
drawer.
questions about each and every one of these musicians. But definitely interesting to see, your connection to Oregon and the Memphis Piano Convention, like, how you were there and how, that connection between you guys.
Well,
So were you there in the time of Fred Ford, Honeymoon Garner making,
sure,
so
absolutely.
you got to play with those guys. I really enjoyed seeing them
Hey man, listen,
as the highlight.
there's no way how I can explain. Memphis embraced me from the day that Memphis put its arms around me from the
Mhm.
moment that I got there. And
Mhm.
so, because I had I knew there was some music going on there, and at the time, well, you know, uh, I've lived in Pittsburgh for a couple of years, and when I left there, again, I'll leave out detail, but when I left Pittsburgh, I had I went right to Memphis, Tennessee, but I didn't. I was prepared to wash dishes. I was prepared to do whatever I had to do to survive.
Mhm.
But as I said, I got there on Tuesday. By Friday, I'm working 7 nights a week. You see,
Love it.
so
Now I won't forgive myself if I don't um at least get some backstory on you working with Ruth Brown, because I've been listening to a lot of Ruth Brown. Today is actually Dinah Washington's birthday, and we're talking earlier about how longevity and careers are just, they don't always line up, and especially in the music industry. And learning that Dinah has passed at 37. We had so many stellar stars at that time who just simply didn't live to old age. But
no,
you got to work with Ruth Brown, who she's one of the most unique figures in rhythm and blues, history, is a woman doing that. So how did you come to meet her and play with her?
okay. With Ruth Brown, how that came about? There was a show called Black and Blue, and a few years later, it went to Broadway. We stayed a couple years on Broadway, and it was a all-star band. I won't go, but Ruth Brown. Before the show came to New York, the show was in Paris, and they'd been in Paris for a year or so. I mean, a long period of time they'd been in Paris. So the last few months of the show in Paris, there was some little conflicts going on within the saxophone section. So the guy who actually was sort of the musical director of the band, put the band together. His name was Rudy Stevenson, and he had been the contractor on Sophisticated Ladies, which precedes that, because Sophisticated Ladies is what inspired me to go back to New York. Because when I left the Ellington band, Mercer Ellington told me I had an open chair in the Ellington band. And so when their show was coming to Broadway, and Memphis, things that were a little slow, and and by then I'm like 34 years old. And I'd went back to school at Memphis State, and I was going to become a school teacher or something. But the voice in my head said, no, go back to New York. And Sophisticated Ladies, the Broadway show with Gregory Hines, that sort of gave me motivation to go back to New York. But the contract of that show, and some years later, Black and Blue, and they were in Paris. So that's when I met Ruth Brown in Paris. And we'd hang out and go to dinner afterwards and so on. So once we did the Broadway show, but at the same time, she was still doing other things, and her career was picking up as doing clubs and things like that. So we just became great friends, great friends. And I worked with her for many years, good 20 years, and it was just, I could write a dissertation about her, because Ruth Brown, back in the day, Atlantic Records, I'm talking about before Ray Charles and so. Right. They used to call Atlantic Records the house that Ruth built. You understand? Because her hit Mama, You Treat Your Daughter Me. Those were big you see. So that was her early career. And then I don't want to go into too many personal details of maybe what happened with her career, because everybody has ups and downs and so on. So that's a whole dissertation. But as far as my personal relationship with her, she's, of all the people that I've worked with, I miss her the most, because she made everybody around her feel important. And if people would come up to her, hey, Ruth, remember I saw you in 1952 in Chicago? Oh, yeah, and blah, blah, blah. We went to dinner, and Susie Jones was there, and so on. So she would go. She remembered everybody, you understand? And her birthday was January 12th, and mine is the 13th, you see? And then and Grady Tate was the 14th, you understand? So
okay, yeah, the birthday buddies.
Yeah, so, if I just go on just about her alone, because she was just such a beautiful, warm spirit, and just such a great, and Bobby Short. I've worked with Bobby Short. Those were Gregory Hines. Certain people can do the exact same thing over and over, but each time they do it, it feels like the first time that they've ever done it. See, everybody can't do that. She could say the same thing. Bobby Short, I went to Carlisle. Bobby Short, word for word, he would say the same thing. And I'm sitting there in the band, so I just heard this on the last show, but since you got a new audience, it felt brand new every time he did it. And that's how Ruth was, you see.
Yeah, vocal master.
Yeah.
Definitely, just a vocal master. So you've technically not been on the road since you started playing in the 64 years.
I have been on the road. I've been on the road a whole bunch, busing trucks, one-nighters, you name it.
Been on the road. This much we know. And you started working with dancers as well.
Well, with
So
Broadway shows, I did like 10 Broadway shows, and most of them were black shows. You understand? So,
gotcha. What's it
yes,
like working on Broadway?
get paid every week. You get benefits. You get, I got, in other words, I started collecting the pension when I was 58, you see. When I was 58, I started, not too many jazz musicians, get a pension. But I
Right.
started collecting my pension at 58. Sonny Stitt was dead at 58. You understand? I'm 77 now. My pension is supposed to be good till I'm 104. So when I'm
Oh,
104, I'll have to go back to work full time. You understand? So that's why I practice every
we'll
day.
be ready for you.
Oh, I practice every day. So that's just
There's Leon. Leon, you have anything you want to ask?
Well, I did. Um, did you ever teach? Did you ever, take some time to?
informally. But say, for instance, I live in my when I moved to Durham, because I believe it or not, I have a lot of information, a lot of experience that I'm chomping at the bit to share. Nobody, they don't teach in jazz school what I know. So I'm really always been very much interested in teaching and being, and because I've had a few private students over the year, and naturally I don't call myself a teacher because that's a whole another job description. I think I can teach. I think I have information. I live in Durham, Tennessee, Durham, North Carolina. The academics avoid me like the plague. You
Mm,
understand?
hmm.
I really wanted to, maybe I talk too much. I don't know. I would really love to be a part of the community, but they really, they for whatever reason, and and I could say, okay, I probably talk too much, or maybe I know too much, or whatever. I could put it on me, but it could also possibly be that sometimes, people are intimidated because they haven't been where I've been. So it could be. I'm not saying for sure, but all I know is I no longer have any interest and really being a part of the community. I like the weather here. I have a great lifestyle. I have a wife that calls me King William just for taking out the garbage. You understand? So I'm ain't nobody got King William. I take out the garbage on Wednesday evening. I bring the cans back Thursday. Oh, thank you, King William. You understand?
You earned it, Bill.
Hey, I'm the best garbage man on this or any other planet. You understand? And I take great pride in it. You understand? Recycle what's garbage, what is recycled. I clean the milk cans and all that. Even the trash collector loves me.
Now, did you have anything in your career that you wanted to do that you didn't get a chance to do?
Right now, I want to be working. I want to be working. Right now, I do very little, and I will get in my. It's not because my whole career, it's I have been a mercenary. In other words, I did it to get paid. You
Right.
understand?
Hmm.
So it's not so much. I just still love to play, and I love to make people feel. You see, but I don't do it very much. And since I used to be working all the time, so when you're not working all the time, when you do get a gig, you have a certain amount of anxiety. And oh, what am I doing? I don't need to do this. What am I doing this for? I
Sure.
went out. Lewis Nash invited me to come out and play at his club out there in Phoenix, and I'm like, it was like a tribute to Jackette, and it's like, why am I? But then it worked, and the people liked me, and I was able to do my thing, and it's like that old time religion. You understand? It's
It comes back.
like a hustler that hadn't been in church in a long time. You understand? But when you do it, and especially because I have nightmares, of being totally, totally, totally incompetent and
Hmm.
and they're so real that when I
Right.
wake up, in other words, I can't even find the music, or I can't even put my horn together in the dreams. And then when
It's
I
a
wake up,
thing.
it takes me about noon to recover because the dream is so real. But most of the time, I'm not saying all the time. There are times when I've gone to New York. I went to New York for 4 nights or whatever, and it took me until the fourth or fifth night to be where I should have been on the first night, you know. So I was very hard on myself, and but that's a whole, you know, I have to work on that. In other words, because yeah, it's things are different and you're not doing, but when it come time to hit, you better hit.
That's a real life thing, you know, like, you know, as a musician, and especially in the culture of musicians who do improvised music, like, there's definitely that aspect of us is like, am I spending enough time with the music and the instrument and all the time that we know it takes to work on the craft and be warm and be ready to say what we want to say? It can definitely do a number on you.
Oh
It's a
wow.
relief to kind of hear it's not
Self-doubt.
something that you ever actually get rid of, in the sense that, like, it's always going to be just part of humanity.
You're right. I said, what are you? I look at myself, I say, you dummy, you're 77 years old. You haven't figured it out yet. You understand? But no, I haven't.
Well, that makes me feel a little bit better. Maybe I should take it easy, because, you know, we can all show ourselves some grace when it comes to that. Usually we're our toughest critics, you know.
Well, it's like that. This is I say to I say, you know what? Every day, the goal is just to be better than you were yesterday. And I'm not just talking about, you know, when I think about life, I don't think about just jazz musicians or musicians. That goes across the board. We're all people. A lot of times musicians or artists think they're, you know, of a special group. They're just like somebody who belongs to this sorority or that sorority. They sort of, you know, sort of put themselves on it. But no, we're all people. The one, and we're all connected, you see. We're all connected, and we all have our faults and our strong points. So no, but people, you know, the blues developed out of our culture. Now, I say the blues was a positive reaction to an adverse condition. But there's a big difference in playing the blues and crying the blues. You understand? The crying the blues don't get you nothing. But so we got a whole lot of entertainers and artists and things. Oh, well, you know, we sort of dwell on, you know, feeling sorry for ourselves, and it don't get you anywhere.
Absolutely. And that's absolutely what you struggle with, as far as getting your message across, whatever genre. So in closing, now that we know we've got your top things that you would give for advice to the upcoming musician, or the musician out here maybe thinking about gigging, you saying it's a free for all, things have changed. Do what's adequate for you to get paid and work towards that. But now, as we shut this down, I want to think musically for you. If you are on a desert island right now, what would be the music you'd need to take with you? Or would you need to take music with you at all? Because a lot of people say, you know, at different points in their career, they're not even listening to it. So what are you listening to, and what do you need to have?
I don't listen as much as I did when I was young, because in fact music is going on in my head all the time. You understand? In other words, I'm practicing in my head. You know, sometimes I get on Finale on the computer and I just play notes in, because I'm a better reader than I was through all of the years of my career. And I played in all these big bands. I played Broadway shows. I was never a great reader. I was a speller, and I could hear faster than I could read. But my reading is actually better now than it was during my busy days playing with all the bands and Broadway shows and things, just because I'm working on it. I'm working on it, and I'm conscious of it. And certain things, lights have gone on my head, because when you look at a rhythm, it's 1 + 1 = 2. You understand? And you cut this in half, and then, you know, it's and I said, now how come I didn't understand this 50 years ago?
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Leon, you have anything else to add?
It's only been 10 minutes.
I know, and I was like, we we still have so much we could even cover even with this, but it's just, oh my gosh, you have such a rich
Listen, let me
history.
tell you something. I started writing a book years ago, and I wrote 100. And the name of the book is Music Lessons. You see, and it's all chronological, going from my childhood up to about 1983. But then I stopped because I said, well, everybody's got a story. You understand? So if I were to continue it, say from 1983 up till now, I wouldn't be able to put it in any chronological order because so much has happened that I don't know what happened when. I don't even know what decade this was in. You understand? So it's
blurred lines.
It's a lot of material. So I don't know. I'm not chomping at the bit to finish my book, but I like to write, and there is a lot of information that I'd like to share, but right now I'm trying to figure out where can I get me a gig somewhere. You understand?
Probably anywhere you want, Bill.
Huh?
Probably anywhere you want to get a gig. I'm sure after somebody sees this, they're gonna be like, "Oh, he's ready to go to work."
No, I wish that were true. I on my Facebook page, I said, "Have horns will travel," and I mean that. I went a couple of months. I drove to New York, and then
the Paladin reference.
I had another gig in Connecticut. And so when I go out of town, I got to pay my hotel bills and gas. So I went to New York and to Connecticut, and I brought home $6. You understand? Last week I went to Detroit, and just to play with James Carter, a benefit for a friend of mine. But I had the hotel bill cost me $300 and some. Luckily, I drive a hybrid car. You understand? But I still love to play. And I'm willing to go anywhere. And I wish I had somebody that would just send me to wherever and let me play with the local cats who's ever there. Because that's one thing that I can do. I can play with anybody because I played from the worst to the absolute best musicians on the planet. And I know how to make chicken soup out of chicken something else. You understand? And I enjoy that. I'm not necessarily enamored by the great virtuoso. I like nice people. I'd rather play with some nice people than some of the, cats that are full of themselves.
Sure.
Well, I feel like after a podcast like this is a fantastic reference for you. I feel like people will definitely call you Bill.
Call me. I'm not cheap, but I'm reasonable. You understand? It ain't all about money. My uncle and my father used to talk about. My uncle would say, money is the root of all evil. My father said, yeah, but you show me a man with no money, I'll show you a bum. You understand? And my uncle say, the meek shall inherit the earth. My father said, yeah, but it don't say what shape it's going to be in when they get it, you see. So I've known all this stuff since I was a little boy. All right. Listen.
Thank you so much.
So much. Maybe we could do this over with the duct tape. All right. Hey, I enjoy. What time is it? Right. Have a good evening, all of you.
It was definitely a pleasure.
Listen to the voice in your head.
Will do.
All right. Goodbye.
There will be a part 2.
Gotta be.
I'm going to say the same thing I said today.
I promised Ronnie that he could do this, but things didn't work out on this one, so he's going to do part 2.
I know Ronnie wants to talk to him.
So you
What'd you say?
I said, I know Ronnie wants to talk to you.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, we did a record together with Sir Roland Hanna. You understand?
Oh, wow.
And one quick story about Sir Roland Hanna. Another brilliant mind, So one time he's writing this music for a puppet show. And he talked about me for months and months about this music he's writing for this puppet show. And the name of the show was called Maya the Bee. It was about this bee, female bee. So he talked about it. And so he hired me for the date. He wanted to bring all these horns, your flute, your piccolo, and your soprano, and so on and so on. So I figured he's writing parts. But when I get to the studio, he's just got some lead sheets. And so he would describe to me what the scene is about. So he figures that would let me know what to play. So now, Bill, and the first tune was called Flying Home, but not Illinois. That's just the name of the tune. So I said, now, Bill, now what this is about, it's this young female bumblebee. And the bumblebee runs away from home and it ends up living with a wasp colony. And it overhears a conversation that the wasps are going to attack the bumblebees. So this bumblebee is flying home to tell the other bumblebees, you know, and he's so serious.
Oh, wow.
And I'm listening like, oh, yeah, okay. I know exactly what to play for that, you know. So, because I don't want to make him, I don't want to interrupt him. So, and I kept my abuse. I put the duct tape on my mouth. And I kept my mouth shut. So right before we got ready to record, I said, Sir Roland, how old is this bumblebee? You know. So Roland said, I thought he would laugh. He said, now the bumblebee's 3 years old, but keep in mind that's like 16 years in human life. In other words, it's an adolescent. You understand? So I said, okay. And we did about 21 songs like that.
Oh, man.
That's awesome.
Right, that's enough. But Ronnie and I did a Gershwin record with him. That was really, really a great experience, you know. So there's so many. I could spend 4 hours talking about Roland Hand or anybody. You understand?
We'll get you back for sure.
All right, shut me up. Turn it off. Pull the plug.
I know.
All right,
Everybody, thank you.
City Jazz Sessions is brought to you by St. Louis City Jazz, a 501c3 company dedicated to music education and appreciation. The CEO is Magic Man 50, and for more ways to connect with City Jazz Sessions, visit cityjazzsessions.wixsite.com/St. Louis. The City Jazz Sessions team includes host, content director, and guest coordinator, jazz great Ronnie Barrage. Follow Ronnie at ronniebarrage.biz. Host, website designer, graphic artist, content director, and guest coordinator, singing sensation Leica. Discover more about Leica at leicamusic.com. Additional production services are provided by Lions Den Productions. Go to thelionsdenstl.wixsite.com/home. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more great content.